Pharmacists, they were supposed to start administering the jab in a few weeks. Now it's not likely until June. When we look at hopes that the population will be vaccinated by October, is it becoming increasingly unlikely?
Well, I hope not, Danica. I mean, our criticism of the government has been that they've promised by their own standards that they would deliver 4 million vaccinations by the end of March. They've clearly failed on that goal, if you like, and they've only done about 800,000, so they're about 3.2 million short of what they set themselves. And what concerns me more, frankly, is that this is a question of national interest. I am gobsmacked by federal cabinet ministers like David Littleproud and Peter Dutton taking pot shots at the states and territories, trying to shift blame onto the states and territories for the slow vaccine rollout, for the failures, when this is a federal government responsibility. They can't fob this off. And instead of taking pot shots, they should shut their trap and get on with their job. Because frankly, Australians do not care about their political point scoring and their gamesmanship. They want the federal government to do their job and get this vaccine rollout done safely and effectively, instead of trying to shift blame.
Well, yesterday we saw the Queensland Deputy Premier Stephen Miles also firing a shot himself, accusing the Prime Minister for using the vaccine rollout to distract from issues in Canberra. Surely this political point scoring is coming from both sides.
Well, to be fair to Stephen Miles, he was responding to David Littleproud and the federal government and the potshots that they were taking by making the very valid point that the states have been given about a third responsibility for the vaccine rollout. They've been given limited supply. And the federal government, which is largely responsible for this, needs to coordinate this effort, needs to show national leadership. And instead, they're playing political games, frankly, by blaming the states. Now, Australians don't want to hear about it. Like, if you're in tourism, you're in hospitality, you're in the university sector, you're in live entertainment or the arts, or your small businesses around the country, what you want to see is the federal government working effectively with the states and territories to deliver the vaccine rollout as safely and effectively and as quickly as possible so that we can all get back on our feet and go back to some sort of normality with business and with life. That's what Australians want to see. And frankly, I also don't want to see. I mean, I'm in a Labor opposition, Danica. Yeah. And even though it's a coalition government, I want them to do their job and do it well for the national interest.
Of course. And it's also impacting our neighbours as well. Australia's racing to secure millions of jabs for PNG, but PNG's already accepted tens of thousands of vaccines from China. Peter, do you think that Australia risks pushing our regional neighbours closer to Beijing?
Well, that's a really interesting question because there are geopolitical consequences for failures in the vaccine rollout or the slow vaccine rollout that we've seen here in Australia. And those geopolitical consequences you touched on, which is that China can see a weakness in our rollout and try and exploit that with respect to our neighbours. Now, if we were doing really well domestically in Australia, would then be able to do much better with our neighbours and helping our neighbours like PNG and other Pacific Island states who are in trouble or becoming more problematic like Timor-Leste. And that's important for us because helping our neighbours helps us as well. We live in the same region. We engage with these countries. They're important to us. And you saw what happened in Queensland when someone from PNG came back to northern Queensland and the lockdown over 3 days. So it is imperative that we're able to play that leadership role in the region. And the slow rollout here domestically means that there's consequences at the regional level as well.
Just finally, New Zealand Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern is expected today to announce a two-way trans-Tasman travel bubble. What's your reaction to this? I mean, how good will this be for both economies?
Well, I've been planning my Easter holidays with the family to regional Victoria, but how good is it to be able to travel overseas? It'll be fantastic for the tourism sectors in both countries. I think that is a kind of a template. We hope this works really well because it's a template for what we're going to see going forward. Particularly, I think Boris Johnson in the UK talked about a vaccine passport. There are going to be ways that we set up these bubbles where people may be able to travel without having to quarantine if they get a vaccine. As it is with Australia and New Zealand, we can travel potentially without quarantining without the vaccine because there's very low cases in both or zero cases in both countries. But I think in the future, you're going to have to see a setup where you're going to have to be vaccinated have a vaccine passport to be able to travel overseas. And let's hope that that template with New Zealand works and we learn the lessons well, and then we can apply it to other countries around the world.
Yeah, absolutely. Some positive news this morning. Peter Khalil, thank you for joining me.